Good evening. Welcome to the Kenmore-Tonawanda Union Free School District Budget Work Session for April 13th, 2021. District Clerk, please note that all trustees are present. Please stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Hey, our board and district vision is to create a community of dynamic learners who possess social awareness, confidence, and a belief in their power to succeed. Our Kenton School community mission is to provide students with support, tools, and diverse opportunities to meet the challenges of an ever-changing world. And our values are respect, independence, trust, teamwork, integrity, excellence, and responsibility. Item 2A is the approval of our agenda. Do I have a motion to approve? So moved by Leslie. Second by Andrew. Is there any discussion? Okay, there being none, I call for a vote. All those in favor so signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion approved unanimously. Okay, item 3A is our 2021-22 budget presentation.
Hello, this is our final budget work session. So we had our last session canceled, but I want to review our recommended budget for you, and we'll be asking you to approve that at the 6:30 regular board meeting. So let's start with where we are currently at in terms of developing our timeline. So we canceled the last meeting. We were really waiting on finalizing some of our expenditures and the final state budget, which they approved late this year. So they approved that after Easter. So we pushed off our meeting and then we canceled it and scheduled to now. So I'm happy that we did that because now we have the final numbers that we want to go with for your support. After this meeting, we have the budget hearing, which is going to happen on May 11th, a week before the budget vote, and the budget vote will happen on May 18th. So as a development update, we've closed the $2.2 million gap. So we had some additional retirements, and we received the final state aid budget. They approved that last week. So we did see some increases to our foundation aid, and I'll talk about that and what the typical increases are in a future slide. The final update I wanted to give is on the stimulus funding. So we've had a little bit more guidance come out with our state aid runs. Excuse me, let me back up. So when the state approves their legislative budget, they send us out these state aid runs that include all of the aid that we can expect from the government, from the state, and we get to analyze those year over year, look and see what we're going to get. And this year, the stimulus funding was at the very bottom, all of the allocations that the schools were getting. So overall, we are getting about $18.3 million in stimulus funding between the second and third rounds. And I just want to talk a little bit about that. In the budget I am presenting to you today for your approval, we have not included any of that federal money in there, which strategically we did because we know we are not going to have that ongoing as a revenue source. So we didn't want to include that, and we didn't have guidance on where exactly we were going to have to account for that. Our initial stimulus funding from the CARES Act was in our general fund, which is the budget that you approve. This money, they have subsequently come out and said, has to be accounted for in our special aid fund, which we account for all the rest of our grants in. So our special ed grant, our Title I grant, they're all accounted for separately. So it's a good thing we didn't build those in, but we did it strategically, and just knowing we're setting ourselves up for stability in the future when those revenues go away. So we've heard a little bit about what we're allowed to spend that money on. A certain percentage is going to have to be allocated to learning loss, which I would hope that we are all trying to address anyway without federal funding, but it will assist us in that. And they've come out with some guidance on health and safety updates that we can do. So we're really investigating those and looking into what we can do, if there are things that we can do with that money over the next 3 fiscal years. So that money, just so you're all aware, is going to be good through September of 2024 or the 24-25 fiscal year, as far as we know. They haven't said there is the possibility to extend it, but I doubt they'll do that. So we're going to try to plan on spending that over the next 3 fiscal years as of now. So what are we looking at in terms of a budget? We're looking at $172 million, $426 and $830 budget. Budget to budget, that's a little more than $3.3 million increase, or about 1.98%. Our levy will increase about 1.7, a little bit over 1.7 million to $89,998,791, or about 1.97%. The estimated tax rate is going to be about $54.20. I'll get more into that in the next slide when I go over the rates. So keeping everything true, that our rate would increase about 1.97%. We're estimating use of fund balance and reserves at about $8.2 million for this budget. When we're looking at the increase on the tax rate, for $100,000 of assessed value house, it's about a $34.50 increase year over year. So let's just talk a little bit about preliminary tax rates. So this is not a final rate. As you know, and we've discussed in the past, several things influence that rate. So town assessments. So if anything gets reassessed or assessed for more, if there's improvements on homes. The other item that affects the town of Tonawanda is the equalization rate, and that's the fact that the houses here are under assessed in an entirety for the town. So we're estimating that is going to be about 33%, which is what it's been for the last 2 fiscal years. So if everything remaining the same, we would be looking about a $54.20 tax rate because of the equalization rate. Again, that would be about $34.50 per $100,000, or $2.87 a month for an average family per $100,000. So I'm just going to skip to the next slide. So on average, our tax rate increase has been about 3.02%. So as you can see, we're under that by over a percent at 1.97. But again, we're relying on the town, the assessments of the town, and the equalization rate, which is set by New York State. So we'll have those final values sometime in July or August at the latest. They have to finalize everything before we can send out the tax bills. And just to reiterate, in terms of the tax rate, our equalization rate, if it were 100%, all that would do is drive down the estimated tax rate. So it would increase our base, so we would be spreading more of our levy over more of a base, which would decrease that $54.20, right? So when we're looking at equalized tax rates, it would be much less, but the houses would be assessed at much more. So instead of your house being assessed at $100,000, it would be assessed at $300,000, but your rate would be lower. Your bill wouldn't be higher. Okay, so let's talk about our state aid and the history of our state aid. So as you can see, our estimated aid is increasing for 21-22. And if you look at the history of our state aid, over the last 11 years, we've roughly had about a 1.4% increase in foundation aid. That's just our general aid, year over year. This year, we're looking at about a 4.36 increase. And if you just take out the years where the gap elimination adjustment, where we were still recovering from the last recession, it's like 2.6-ish% of an increase that we saw, besides last year, which we didn't see anything because the pandemic had hit. So it's really not a large increase. Some districts are seeing 10 and 20% increase, or equivalent to $5 or more million. So we're not seeing those levels of increases, but we did see a nice increase this year for us. So there you can see our nice increase. And I talked about the tax rates and the increase a little bit. So when you break down what our percentages are of our budget are related to real property tax, state and federal, other sales tax, and appropriated fund balance, we're right on par for where we have been in prior years. So that's good. The majority of the increase year to year, the $3 million, has been made up by property taxes and the foundation aid increase. Some of the other things we looked at this year was a potential reduction in sales tax revenue, which we took into account, but we've really been, grateful that our sales tax has been on point for what we have thought it was going to be year over year at this point. I think with Amazon and the delivery services that we've seen as a whole, we're still seeing that sales tax be a good number. So that's a positive for us at this point. So one other thing I want to mention about foundation aid. So the state has been talking about fully funding foundation aid. It's something that I've mentioned in my past presentations, and they've been talking about doing it for a number of years. So one thing as we look about raising taxes, and do we really need to raise taxes? So we're getting federal money, and we saw a $1.7 million increase in our state aid year over year. So, someone may ask, why do we need to raise taxes? Well, there are several reasons. So the first, if you look at what our taxes are being raised, that's only equivalent to the amount of the contractual salary increases that we have to increase year over year. So that $1.7 million in foundation aid went directly to that, and doesn't include any of the other expenditure increases that we have. So with our contractual salaries, we also have the benefits that are related to those. So we're seeing a slight increase in TRS, the teacher retirement system. We're seeing a slight increase in the employee retirement system. And of course, just natural increases in other things like health insurance and the cost of that to the district. So if we didn't raise taxes this year, we would put ourselves at a deficit next year because of the tax cap to raise taxes without having to go out and ask the voters to approve at a higher percentage rate, percentage rate. The other thing that I want to mention, and I don't have the tax cap right here with me, is we have the capital exclusion. So that allows us to raise our taxes more than the CPI or the 2%. So we have the difference between what the state pays us in building aid and our debt payments. We're allowed to levy that in taxes. So in a year when you're determining the tax cap, what you do is you have to subtract out last year's levy related to your exclusion and add in this year's. So if we don't go up to that cap, we will have to subtract out more money than we potentially could be bringing in. So we may not be able to raise in taxes what we need for that fiscal year. So we're setting it up for financial success. We want to be able to weather storms in the future that are like this, the pandemic, that could have potentially hit us hard or harder in a financial standpoint. So we're setting that up, the structure to be stable over the next 5-10 years down the road. So just looking, again, to reiterate, the $172 million is broken down in percentages by how we get paid. So again, on average, if you look at our past years, this is very typical for our district in percentage, in relationship to the percentages. And looking at our expenditures budget, some of our largest increases year over year, and I probably already touched on them a little bit, are salary and benefits, which are contractual costs. So we have about $1.7 million of an increase that's related to those salary and benefits, and an additional $1 million related to the benefits to that. So I'm sorry, just $1.7 million is related to salary, $1 million is related to the benefits on that year over year. So some of the other larger dollar amount increases that we see are contractual costs. So we've noticed some trends in our special ed lines for contractual costs, so we've increased those a little bit, and our equipment for some of our technology initiatives that we want to beef up moving forward. So just to reiterate what our propositions will be and what I'm asking for you all to approve. So the first proposition is the budget at $172,426,830. And then as a reminder, our bus proposition, we try to replace 10 buses per year on a cycle so that it lowers our maintenance costs over time and our reliance on good mechanics, although we have them, people who are able to keep up to date and doing the actual work on the buses that are now similar to cars, like they have more technology in them and it's requiring more of a background in that to be able to fix them. And so our share on those 10 buses will be about $306,000 after our transportation aid on those. So just to sum up before I ask for questions, so we are receiving a large amount in aid from the federal government. And our plans moving forward are to address, obviously, learning loss. That's one of the items that they require. But we're planning on, and Assistant Superintendent White isn't here right now, but along with her and the directors of secondary education and elementary education, putting together a plan that really addresses those items and potentially being able to work those into future budgets if they're things that work in relationship to really making our students 21st century learners. So we have a lot of initiatives that we need to cover in relationship to that. So that includes technology, culture, safety, security. So we're setting our structure up now so that in the future we can roll out these initiatives down the line. And so that's something that I know Assistant Superintendent White and her team are going to be working on in the future. Does anybody have any questions?
Yes, thank you very much for the presentation, Assistant Superintendent Marasco. My first question, I just have a couple,
Sure.
is the door still open for any last-minute retirement announcements?
I think that's a contractual obligation. I would say we would have to ask Assistant Superintendent Richard.
By contract, it is not, but we always entertain discussions if there's someone willing to look at the retired, then yeah, we're always going to entertain any kind of discussion.
Okay, thank you.
Can I add to that too? They had talked about pushing something through for an early retirement incentive. They've done it, but for only New York City schools. So that's the information that I got passed along.
And also, I appreciate the fact that you did not include the federal stimulus in our budget. But I'm just curious, have you heard of any guidelines for districts to apportion or pace the spending over those 3 years?
So they just came out with some guidance that I read today. So they're talking about releasing it over time. So they're not just going to give it to us all up front, which nobody had really known about. They're going to release it slowly over time, and we'll have to see what that means for us as a district. But I can tell you that, you know, we'll be able to use that money towards the learning loss initially and then going on from there, because planning for health and safety upgrades is a little bit more than just, you know, a one-year thing, potentially, so.
So can I piggyback off that, Dr. Riegstad? Excellent point, and thank you for, once again, recognizing that Nicole had that, and that's been a focus, because the two key different words here are supplant versus to supplement what we're doing. We don't want to take that money to supplant what we know are going to be our year-over-year costs. Anything that we do supplement, we want to make sure that we set up the structure to be able to sustain it. So with that and with learning loss, those structural conversations will continue to focus on the Kenton Forward, revising the Kenton Forward as necessary, but like Nicole said, anything from technology, which this year, to be able to come out balanced the way that we did, and all the technology that we implemented becoming a one-to-one district was pretty remarkable. It took a lot of people to come together in order to be able to accomplish that. Nicole was very integral in that. But security, we don't, Nicole said something during her presentation, you never want to find yourself in a position where years down the road, you did something back here to set you up for failure here. Districts have seen that. Kenton's gone through that in the past. You know, not putting blame, it's just something that has happened, whether it be because of state aid or whatever. What we're carefully doing is we're being very strategic with how we're setting up our funds to make sure that we're not in that position. We have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of work on the security front to continue to improve, a lot of work on the technology front, and of course on the instructional front with learning loss that we'll be bringing to the board and to the public in the future as that's continued to develop. One of the things that we did learn is that a plan has to be established by the beginning of summer, posted to the public, and that's what Kelly and her team are working very diligently on. We'll continue to talk to the board about that also in the structural changes that we make and how those will impact for the future as well.
So one other thing just to address that as well. So some people have built that additional funding into their budgets and are now scrambling to try to remove that and to discuss what they're going to do with that money when it's gone. So it's a very good thing that we didn't do that.
You could play Dr. Feelgood for a year, and then all of a sudden 2 years from now it comes back to haunt you miserably, and we have a lot of layoffs and worrying about programming for children instead of setting it up right from the get-go.
So, Tom, are you done?
Yes, I am.
So I had a question about the learning loss, and I think it's been answered, and you're saying that there's a plan that we need to have together by the beginning of the summer. But presumably when we're talking about learning loss, we're talking about, for example, having like an enhanced summer school program this year and potentially some like increased emphasis on remedial AIS type services in the fall and things like that, correct?
RTI, summer school, after-school programming, thinking out of the box how we structure our programming. We have to think that we want to entice kids beyond the realm of instruction as well, right? The instruction is part of the pie, but there's other things, just like a regular school day, that entices kids as well with the instruction. So those extracurricular, those enrichment activities, and they're doing a good job. We're planning between the instructional team, Brett, Banker, different things that we can put into the and those things to carry on for years to come, even after, you know, that's just a new way that we do things in Kenton.
Right.
That's how we want to set it up.
Yeah, and I imagine, I mean, we need to do that in part because the impact of this is not just something that we make up over the summer or that we even make up next year, especially those younger kids who have, you know, missed out a lot of in-person instruction in the kindergarten, first, second grade, where the reading and the interaction is more critical. So I'm glad that this is elevated to a state and federal level, that we're having conversations about that, because it really is critical. We can't, even if things were, say, back to normal in the fall, we can't just assume that, you know, it's back to normal, right? We've got a lot of work to do to make sure that we're, you know, that 10 years from now we're graduating kids who are in a good place.
It's an excellent point, Mr. Gianni, Board Member Gianni. It's the way that we tend to look at it is it's a generational thing. We have to look at this entire from K2 through K all the way through senior year, what we need to do to address that. The primary years are absolutely going to be our biggest focus right now.
Great, thank you.
So first, I appreciate you explaining the, like in layman's terms, I guess, because I think to some degree, people see all this money and they think, great, you know. So I appreciate that explanation. I know that there was some fear that the state was going to take some of that federal money, and we're sure that that's not going to happen.
So they've taken their share. They're taking the full 10% on one of them, and they're saying that they're going to address the application process. So there was a lot of, the state fell down on a lot of levels. They have a really archaic system for most things. So even the application process, they wanted to have that be paper, fully paper, which, right? So now where we're at, they took money, and what did they do with that? There's so many education-related departments in the state that are sorely understaffed, that they need to address that for these places to be able to function. Like the CARES Act, for example, I luckily was able to get in touch with somebody who was able to approve that's the first round of stimulus funding, the CARES Act. They just did that in February. Now, they were relying on us to push some of that money out to the non-public and charter schools, which they have not included in the second and third round. They did their own allocations to them, thankfully, because I think they saw the need was there for them to get money, but nobody was approving our applications. I mean, Lancaster, Grand Island, both of them, I sent them the contact information because I had heard from them. They had heard nothing. That was as of like 2 weeks ago. So they were able to get theirs approved, but again, I hope that they use that money in a real way to start to address some of the gaps they have in their own systems.
So to that point also, Board Member Battaglia, that has been a sigh of relief in these next two rounds, because the first round was robbing from Peter to pay Paul. And it was, you know, not to talk poorly about the state but that's just the way it turned out. Right. That you're getting X amount of dollars, but we're taking that same X amount of dollars from your aid. So really districts were left with a net sum gain of nothing. Right.
And so in terms of the administrative costs that they're allowed to take, they took that and then they allocated the rest to schools. So
That's right.
As far as I know, the allocations that we've seen on the state aid runs are the allocations that we will receive and be able to apply for. Because we still have to apply for this money. That's the other misconception. We must apply for this money and tell them what we're going to do for it.
Yeah.
So.
And the advocacy, though, from all of our partners at the state level and our local representatives was a
Yes.
huge help. It's been, so all the work that boards of education have done, and there was a lot of work going on this spring. And I think the state heard everybody loudly and clearly of what the need is going to be, to Board Member Gianni's point, for years to come.
Any other questions? Okay, that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Assistant Superintendent Marasco. Item 4 is public comments. Do we have any public budgetary comments this evening? No? Okay. Any other comments from the board? All right, so we don't have a need for an executive session. Do I have a motion to adjourn? So moved by Tom. I'm sorry, second by Jen. Any discussion? Okay, there being none, I call for a vote. All those in favor so signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried unanimously, and we are adjourned.